There's a number that doesn't get talked about enough. The average age of a first-time Australian founder who builds a business that actually lasts isn't 24. It isn't the university dropout in a garage. According to research tracking business survival and growth, it's closer to 45. That's not a feel-good statistic designed to make people feel better about themselves. That's just what the data shows when you strip away the mythology and look at what actually holds. If you're in your late 30s or 40s and you feel like the window is closing, this script is worth your time. There's a version of financial success that gets repeated so often it starts to feel like physics. Get in early, compound early, build early. The messaging is everywhere. Retire at 45, hit your first million before 40, have your super sorted by 35. And for some people, that's real. But for a lot of men, particularly men who spent their 20s and early 30s trying to figure out what they actually wanted rather than executing a plan they'd already locked in, that timeline creates a specific kind of dread. Not panic, something quieter. A background calculation that runs constantly. How far behind am I? Can I close the gap? Is it too late to matter? That calculation is almost always based on the wrong starting point. Let's put some real numbers on this. The median Australian full-time wage sits around $98,000 gross. After tax and the Medicare levy, you're taking home roughly $74,000. If you're 42, haven't accumulated much in super, and are renting in Melbourne at around $632 a week, the maths feels brutal. Your super balance might be sitting at $80,000 or $90,000 when the ASFA comfortable retirement standard suggests you need somewhere around $595,000 as a single person to retire with genuine comfort. That gap looks enormous. But here's what the calculation misses. The superannuation guarantee is now 12% of your salary. On a $98,000 income, that's $11,760 going in annually before you add a single voluntary dollar. The concessional contribution cap sits at $30,000 per year, meaning you can salary sacrifice the gap between what your employer contributes and that cap and do it in pre-tax dollars. That's not a small lever. For someone on $98,000, maximizing concessional contributions could add roughly $18,000 a year into super at a tax rate of 15% inside the fund, compared to your marginal rate of 32.5% outside it. That difference compounds. A man who starts doing this seriously at 42 and keeps going until 67, the current preservation age for the age pension, has 25 years of serious accumulation ahead of him. At an average annual return of 7%, which is conservative for a balanced or growth fund, $18,000 a year in additional contributions over 25 years produces roughly $1.1 million added to whatever you already have. The gap is not what it looks like at first glance. Here's where it gets more complicated. Knowing the numbers exist doesn't automatically make a man act on them. And the reason most late starters don't move sooner isn't laziness or ignorance. It's something more structural than that. A lot of men who arrive late spent their earlier years trying paths that didn't fit. They took jobs that looked sensible and felt hollow. They started things they didn't finish. They watched people around them accumulate the visible markers, the property, the title, the salary bracket, while they were still trying to figure out the shape of their own working life. And somewhere in that period, they developed a complicated relationship with financial ambition. Not indifference, something more like distrust of their own ability to follow through. That distrust is expensive. Not because it's irrational, it's usually based on real experience, but because it keeps men sitting with a plan they haven't started yet, waiting until they feel ready enough to commit. The men who turn this around don't wait for that feeling. They start the mechanics before the feeling arrives. They open the salary sacrifice arrangement with their employer. They set up an automatic transfer into a high-interest savings account with ING or Macquarie. They look at their super fund and actually change the investment option from the default to a growth allocation appropriate for someone with 25 years of accumulation still ahead. They do the administrative things first because the administrative things don't require certainty. They just require a decision. People systematically underestimate what a long runway does. This isn't motivational framing, it's mathematics. The most powerful variable in compounding is not the interest rate, it's time. And a 42-year-old who takes wealth building seriously has 25 years. A 35-year-old who hasn't started yet has 32 years. Neither of those people is finished. Both of them, if they act now rather than waiting for confidence, can build something substantial. The ASFR comfortable standard for a single homeowner sits at around $595,000. For a couple, it's closer to $690,000. Those figures assume partial access to the age pension, which currently pays roughly $29,000 a year for a single person. If you own your home and reach that threshold in super, you're looking at a genuinely comfortable retirement. Not extravagant, comfortable. The men who don't reach it aren't mostly the ones who started late. They're the ones who started late and then told themselves it was too late to matter and stopped. There's another type of compounding that late starters build without realizing it, and it doesn't show up on a balance sheet until well into the second half of life. Men who spent years failing, pivoting, working in roles that didn't fit, building things that didn't survive. They accumulate something that can't be manufactured quickly. They develop an unusually accurate read of risk. Not theoretical risk, real risk. The kind you understand because you've personally experienced the gap between what something looked like on paper and what it actually delivered. They've stress tested themselves. They know what they do when things fall apart because they've been there. That specific quality, the ability to read a situation at a level that faster movers haven't developed, is decisive when it matters. The man who's been through several failures makes better decisions with $300,000 than he made with $30,000. Not because the amount changed him, but because the years between those two numbers changed him. This is not a consolation prize. It's a genuine competitive advantage that compounds quietly in the background while the visible financial metrics are still catching up. There's a version of this story that doesn't end well. Not because the delay was too long or the starting point too far back. Because the man in the middle of it decides at some point that the years he spent not building are evidence of something permanently wrong with him. That interpretation is the thing that actually closes the window, not the maths, the story. Men who carry a quiet, hardened resentment of their own timeline, who measure every current decision against an imaginary version of their life where they got it right at 28. They don't build well. They build from a defensive crouch, trying to make up for something, and they make worse decisions as a result. They over-leverage. They chase yield that looks better on paper than it is. They take on investment risk that doesn't match their actual position because patience feels like falling further behind. The men who turn late starts into something real, do something different with those years. They don't perform gratitude about them. They don't pretend the delay was secretly ideal. They just stop treating it as a permanent indictment of their capability and start treating it as the ground they were built on. Every failed path, every year that looked like confusion, every job that didn't fit, that's a record of a person who couldn't commit to something false. That's not a character flaw. In financial terms, that's called avoiding a sunk cost. If you're reading this in your 40s and the financial gap feels too wide to close, run the actual numbers before you accept that conclusion. Look at what maximizing your concessional contributions does over 20 years. Look at what shifting your super to a growth option does to projected balances. Look at what eliminating one significant expense, a car upgrade deferred, a subscription bundle cancelled, a pattern of spending that never actually delivered what you were looking for, adds back to the equation over a decade. The numbers are almost always better than the feeling suggests, and the feeling is almost always based on a comparison to a timeline that was never relevant to the life you're actually living. The question was never whether you started late. The question is whether you start now. If this landed close to home, leave a comment. I read them. And if you want more content built around where you actually are rather than where the standard narrative assumes you should be, subscribe. There's a lot more to come.